Welcome to the Cannacurio podcast, powered by Cannabis Media. I'm your host, Ed Keating. On today's show, we're joined by Michael Piermont, president of Leaf Trade. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be
Yeah.
here.
Well, a lot has happened since we chatted last summer, so I'm glad you're able to come back and we could get caught up. Before we get into the last 10 months or so, I was hoping that you could still tell us a little bit about your background for people who maybe didn't catch our last interview, and tell us how you landed at Leaf Trade.
Yeah. So I've always kind of navigated towards early growth stage companies, always kind of in niche or high growth areas. So health and fitness, insurance. Started a company that did a lot of back office solutions for small gyms, trainers. That's where I really kind of got my forte into payments, right? And allowing maybe folks who aren't sitting at a desk or a traditional work cycle to use payments, which that experience has helped me a lot in cannabis. And after exiting a few companies, I had always watched regulated cannabis. I knew there were going to be a lot of B2B components, a lot of regulated B2B components that I had experience in. And luckily for me, I live in Illinois, and in 2014, 15, the early medical program started coming together. Me and my partner James, started talking to the early folks in the market, who we all know as the Veranos and the GTIs and Ascends, right, and Grassroots. But back then they were really single state operators, maybe dual state operators. And so we really just listened, and we really believed that these folks were in a position, both because of the way that the Illinois market was structured and because of the way that they were looking at things into other markets, Maryland and PA and Ohio, that we thought that really early on, this was going to be the path for large cannabis companies to grow. And we thought that the market would really adopt this. So we listened to what our early customers said, and before we knew it, we were diving in and haven't left since.
Wow. Well, it's so interesting going from fitness insurance all the way to cannabis and running a giant marketplace. I mean, that's a great pathway and really fascinating. Could you tell everybody also a little bit more about what Leaf Trade does, just so that we have a good level set here?
Yeah, so Leaf Trade really helps to organize not only all of the inventory on the wholesale side, but really organize the process both internally and externally. So it allows dispensaries to see real-time inventory, but all the data that goes with the inventory, the lab results, the invoice, the packing, all the compliance steps that are needed to fulfill that order. And then, depending whether the state is, kind of a new medical state where inventory is, kind of on the lower side, or if it's a traditional legacy market, the back end of Leaf Trade helps the sellers organize that and really sell, not only to external folks, but a lot of our customers are using this to balance out inventory to their own stores. So really, B2B procurement platform all the way through all the back office stuff, including payment and the collection of payment.
Interesting. Now, just a question occurred to me that we've seen a lot of companies in this space on the information side that come in and try and scrape a lot of these store menus and provide intelligent and insight, sort of like stockouts and whatnot. I mean, are those services accurate? I think they're there to empower salespeople to go in and say, "Hey, Michael, you need to buy more of this because we can tell that you're out." Like, is that a real phenomenon in the cannabis space now?
Some of them are accurate. Some of them are accurate at times, right? And what I would say is, without getting into specific companies, if you rely on another company or another source for your information or data, sometimes it's correct and sometimes it's not. Sometimes the connection in between the two into the two products might not be accurate, or so I think there are a few folks who are able to scrape live menus and take that information back to some customers, but it's hard. We actually do that a little bit because we know when people are buying, right, from a
Yes.
wholesale, and you
Right.
wouldn't buy if you had inventory or you were, not running low. And that is actually the genesis of kind of what we're doing now, and some of the moves we've been making.
Oh, good, good. Well, thanks for letting me digress into that because we've seen some of this going on, and I'm in agreement. Especially if somebody's using your platform, they wouldn't really need another platform to tell them what they have or don't have. So why make it more complex? But some of the big news is recently you merged with Sweed, and curious to hear what brought that about. It's a big story.
Yeah, I mean, again, we just sat there listening to our customers, and we've been really, really focused on the wholesale side. We've been really, really focused on just nailing that, making sure the inventory is organized in real time. And we've been hearing, some consistent problems that it's hard to get the inventory into point of sale systems once it arrives
Right.
at the dispensary. There's a lot of manual processes that take time, and there are bud tenders and managers that don't have that time, right? And then we also hear that it's like we talked about before, it's really hard to get an accurate assessment of what's at their store and when they should order, right?
Mm,
So there's an inventory component, then someone's buying and they have to go around and around and buy from all these different folks. Whereas now we can connect the point of sale, loyalty, ecom, all the way back to Leaf Trade. So if, Verano in their store is out of a certain level of inventory, or their inventory goes down, that can call back to Leaf Trade and create an order for themselves or for someone else, right?
huh.
And so getting real-time data, but more importantly, actionable data where, boom, click, order, done, next, as opposed to like, create this data set, send it to the, wholesale team or the inventory team, then go, and look for inventory and create orders.
So this is helpful for me understanding the process. So I appreciate the education part of it. Is one of the things that you have done then is bridge the information gap from wholesale to retail, which I'm assuming may also have some compliance benefits too. Like where
Yep.
everything is, and it's a single chain of custody instead of like,
Yep.
let's get Bob in the warehouse to stitch it together. I mean, is that how it comes together?
Exactly, right? It's the same product. It starts at Leaf Trade. It starts really even before that in BioTrack or Metric, right? Comes over to Leaf Trade, right? And we're just continuing down the path. But instead of, you know, dropping the box off at a river and walking away, we're putting it safely in the boat and, handing it off to Sweed, and then they can hand that inventory off to the customers, whether that's in the form of e-com, with loyalty attached to it, or they go in store and buy something, right? So we want to make sure that information, the lab data, all the components behind cannabis are, accurate. Because I always use this analogy: when you go to 7-Eleven, every Pepsi, every Coke is the same, right? And
Mm,
when you pull out the cannabis batches, they're all are different, or could be different, or have different THC levels, and people sell differently on that, right? So it's really important that every batch is accurate and has a full data set all the way through the supply chain.
got it. Got it. So, in the work that we've done at Cannabis Media, we've looked a lot into the point of sale space and the software stack. And the last time we did our big point of sale report, the number was about 79 unique point of sale vendors or brands in the United States.
Mhm.
So obviously you chose Sweed, and I'm wondering if you could give us just a little bit more background on that company and sort of what they do and why they were so attractive.
Yeah, so we've looked at a bunch of them. 79 is a big number. We didn't look at that many. So, Sweet is a very, very similar path as Leaf Trade. They really, really focused on the enterprise customer first. While we, had some really good early customers who helped us with the product and were great adopters. They did as well. So TerraSen was one of their really early customers. And one of the big differentiators with Sweed is it's an all-in-one solution, right? So you have the inventory that is very well organized in Sweed, and then they push out to an e-com platform that's their own, right?
Mhm.
And Sweed stays behind the scenes, so it's not a marketplace, right? So Curaleaf can put Sweed directly on their website, and you don't see other stores, right? You go right to their site. The other all-in-one feature that's really nice is the loyalty aspect of it, right? So now as you're bringing your stores together regionally, nationally, you can have one loyalty program that can stretch across the country,
Mhm.
right? Right now, people are doing it very, very regional. You know, you may have a loyalty program for Illinois, but that might not transfer to
Wow.
Arizona, right? And so the consumer who shops every day at that dispensary by their house, they don't even know that there's another dispensary in another state, right? And you know that's a huge, huge component. The other aspect of that is compliance, right? There are some states that look at loyalty or marketing programs differently,
True.
right? And so because you use one platform, right, and this is nothing new, vendor consolidation has been around. It gives them more operational leverage to build everything correctly, build the right loyalty across the country, build the right marketing set, the right e-com process. And really what I think is kind of the next iteration of cannabis is, you know, having these processes centralized, especially for the larger companies, right?
Yeah.
So they can, you know, scale. You can't scale with 35 different processes and 25 different tech products that, you know, all do different things. It becomes really, really hard to manage. And we forget a lot of the, you know, medium to large cannabis companies got there by acquiring other companies, right? In different markets with different tech. And so, you know, I've been really impressed about how fast folks have been moving to consolidate, to streamline operations because they have to, right? There's no margin left. Prices are going down. So the only way to, you know, make the same money or more is to really, really, you know, lean into efficiencies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the operational efficiency is key, and you know what you're talking about in terms of having sort of a single system is a presentation that somebody in a past industry talked about where they interviewed their customers and they'd ask this great question that I've kept hold of for many years, which is what were you using the 10 minutes before you used my product and the 10 minutes after? And they started to build that out. And it sort of seems like with what you guys have done too, it's like, well, people have this need too. And how do we do it? And at the end of the day, they came up with this great metric, which is not share of wallet, but how much of your share of day do I own? And I love that
Yep.
because it's just such a thoughtful way of thinking of, how your customers are having to make choices. And if they're hopping between lots of software installs or pieces of software, that's not terribly efficient. And, they're not going to meet those numbers that you were just talking about.
It's also tough for the customer, you know, maintaining logins to an e-com platform and then your local store, right? And maybe even, you know, some brands have you in, you know, some loyalty programs, and it just becomes tough, right? And there's no secret, you know, Nike sells shoes on Amazon, but they sell more shoes on Nike.com, and they sell them for more, and that's where they want you to go.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Now, as you were working with Sweed, you mentioned a couple of their customers. Was there much customer overlap between the two of you? Because I know when I've gone through mergers, that's one of the things you look at, and it may have been a driver or it might not have mattered at all. But I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, there's some. A lot of our dispensaries who don't pay for Leaf Trade but use it to acquire products and purchase as a full procurement platform, of course, are starting to migrate or have migrated to Sweed. And then there are a lot of customers who are in the process of migrating to Sweed that we've got to, you know, our customers that we've talked to during the merger.
Yeah.
So that's what's nice for us is not only is there focus enterprise, which has always been our focus, but they're kind of, ahead of the game as far as already starting to migrate some of our current customers, where we can jump right in and kind of help them and connect the systems, right?
Yeah, yeah. And you touched on a couple of these, but maybe if you could sort of go through the list, like what are all the piece parts that you now offer somebody? Because we've talked about wholesale, we've talked about POS. I think you mentioned loyalty. Are there other elements too that
Yeah.
are there like payment or other things too that really build out that stack?
Yeah, so on the Leaf Trade side, you've got we have marketing services where we actually do the heavy lifting, whether it's campaign creation. Also, we maintain the list and all of the analytics around these campaigns. We do also have a payment service on Leaf Trade where we'll extract payment on the day that the invoice is due, right, for a very small fee without interest. Of course, analytics platform, like we talked about, understanding the inventory. On Sweed, it's really full service retail, everything. So you've got e-com on the front end. There's loyalty, of course, point of sale, and then true PIN debit that integrates right into it. So full service, all four components, as well as if there is B2C delivery, we allow the B2C delivery companies to hook right in to the point of sale as well. So we can actually move the inventory to the delivery companies.
And for your customers, in terms of how you offer that those are a lot of choices. I mean, that's quite a menu, if you'll excuse the pun there. Can people go a la carte? Because I'm getting the impression that you're not a forced bundle, like take it all or leave it. So how do you do that?
We're not a forced bundle, but there's been very few, maybe one or two, who have not taken it all, because really the bread and butter is most of the folks have tried one or two of the pieces and got stuck trying to connect to the other pieces. So the all-in-one aspect is, clean data in, clean data out type of thing. There are one or two who, wanted to keep both e-com situations going, right? They wanted to keep the Amazon and the Nike.com, and that's okay for us. But all the other ones have really focused, or at least brought in payment, POS, as well as loyalty and marketing.
Got it. Got it. Now, switching gears a bit, I noticed in doing some research that you are on many of the metric state systems as being a featured vendor or an appropriate vendor. So it makes me think of sort of the whole compliance angle, which is is this a big issue and how do you manage it? And now that you've got a merger of two companies, what is that like? Because my background's in compliance, and the rule of thumb we had is when somebody tries to do business in usually 3 to 4 states, that's when a client will come to some service provider and say, yeah, uncle, I give up, help me out here. So with the number of states you're talking, I imagine that's got to be an important role that you must play and have to deal with.
It's kind of like a doctor scrubbing in, it's just kind of the world we live in. Because on the Leaf Trade side, because day one starts with the plugin to the seed to sale. It's like before we can even launch a state, we focus on the compliance. How do we get into the seed to sale?
Right.
What, even though we may have an integration with Metric in 6 states, the 7th state might do things, differently. There might be an older version of BioTrack that's being used. So really before we even look to launch a state, that's what we're building. It's kind of that last mile compliance piece.
Yeah.
And because we allow folks to really lean into the compliance tools they have to use, the seed to sale tools that are state mandated. Once the inventory is in our system, it has to be set up compliantly because it came from the seed to sale, right? And so that's kind of the first focus always when launching a market, and it's just that's our ball game, right? Is we are the connector that allows medium to large companies run single processes, but still have that differentiator or that compliance tweak in each market.
Sure. Well, speaking of markets and the medium to large companies, helps me think through my next question, which is, as cannabis media, and I'm sure as you have looked across the country, we joke that every state is its own sovereign nation when it comes to compliance rules, regulations. I mean, it's just mind-boggling what people have to keep track of. So I'm curious, how you and your team, especially in your role on the revenue side, see the market. Like, we've got Oklahoma, which last count had like 2,000 to 2,400 stores. I think one store for every 70 people, versus Connecticut, where it's still where I live, where it's kind of a small set.
Mhm.
Are there certain states that are attractive because of the regulatory structure versus ones that you shun because maybe not shun, but they're not the first place you're going to send your sales team to?
That's actually basically our whole strategy. Focus on the limited license states.
Yep.
And with Sweed, we'll start opening up a little more, right? Because if someone has 30 dispensaries in California, that's great. But typically, Leaf Trade is really focused on, and we even call them our primary markets, is the highly regulated, newly emerging states, which typically are limited licenses, right?
Yep.
There are a few states that act more like limited license states, like Massachusetts, even though there's not technically a limit just because of how they issue licenses. But the less licenses that are distributed early in the market, the better that we think that market has, or better future that that market should lean into. So that's kind of always been, we've shied away from Oklahoma, shied away from Oregon, California, really on the Leaf Trade side, we've shied away from, and the Nevadas and Arizonas, while on the West Coast, to us feel a little more like kind of the limited markets that
Yep.
we're used to. I think as Leaf Trade starts expanding, gets bigger, our customers get bigger, we will be in every state. It's just a question of time and resources. And for us, fundraising has always been a focus of where does the dollar go the longest.
Yes.
And raising money to get all of Illinois and all of PA and all of New Jersey and all of Connecticut, is more important, or was more important, than getting a few folks in California, right?
Yeah.
And just we've seen some competitors and some other people in the space raise a lot more money than us and then burn it in some of these non-regulated states.
Well, an analogy on that one to me is, companies like Acreage and MedMen, where they went for the land grab and they were getting
Yep.
licenses in marginal states where there were, 3 patients or something on the state's roll. And yeah, you planted your flag there, but at what cost? And it seemed to be a
Yep.
pretty high cost. And then the market eventually punished them. I think, pretty hard. I think, Acreage may have come back, but, MedMen, my shares are worth about 2 cents a piece now. So yeah, I think, yeah, I think there's definitely some challenges there, but also too with that approach, you're following your customers. So if they are
Exactly.
in a certain state, you may have to be in there, and you'll follow them, but it doesn't mean that you have to service everybody in the state. So that may
Right.
make the sanity check okay.
Yeah, and for us, just like you said, we may go to California and service a few customers, but doesn't necessarily mean we will spend marketing dollars or move sales reps there, right? And so for us, we actually are live in California with a few customers in that exact situation.
Yeah, we do the same thing. There's some features we roll out where we go to certain people
Yep.
and try it out first, make sure it makes sense before we push it out even further. So staying on the marketing sales front, we always like to ask how does cannabis media help you achieve your goals? Because you've been a customer of ours for a while, and we always like to hear how people are able to use us.
Even way back when in 2017 or 18, when we were a 2 or 3 person shop, that was it. All I had was cannabis media. And because our whole business relied on limited license states, it was so important that I could know exactly who had that license, was it valid or not, was it transferred? That was it. There was no other, there was no other way to do it. And so for us, it's really important because we are not out there, robo dialing and sending 50 emails because we're in such of these limited states. So we have to have the right data all the time in a kind of a limited scope.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we're striving to continue to do that. You talked about limited markets. My team is working on the Alabama information that was just released, and I was looking through some of it. 950-page applications. It's sort of
Yeah.
like Florida and New York in the old days. So, but
Well,
we're pouring
well,
through it to see
it's
who
funny
can.
they didn't get that many responses, and then I did the same thing. I looked at the application. I was like, well, that's why it's 984 pages, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's bad because you'll get the real people who've thought this out and aren't trying to win the license to sell it.
Right, right. Like the two that I saw are actually my colleague went through them. True Leave is one of the ones that's in that list, as well as a hometown favorite here in Connecticut, Fine Fettle. They go under
Yep.
FFD. So those are the two that sort of jumped out at me. I haven't looked at all 90 yet, but before the weekend's out, I probably will. So yeah, it's good to hear, and we're also working to help people do exactly what you said through technology solutions to help them check whether a license is valid now. I mean, that's become a compliance piece of our business, not just a marketing one, as well. So sort of looking at the business in the industry, going a little bit broader out, what kind of challenges are you contending with now? I mean, the market's very different than when we were, recording this 10 months ago or so. So what challenges are you seeing out there, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, prices are going down and companies have less folks to navigate through tough times.
Mhm.
You've also got, just like you said, 10 months ago, 14 months ago, 2 years ago, things were better, right? Everyone was, walking in, everything sold. People weren't fixing problems because there weren't as many problems or they didn't see the problems. So, the challenges are still there and we have less people to deal with them, or the companies have less people to deal with them. But what I've seen, probably faster than I even thought, were, the consolidation of both tech and people. So you're seeing a lot of big companies kind of consolidate wholesale and retail, right? Especially if they're vertically integrated. They don't have these
Mhm.
huge wholesale teams and these huge retail teams with a big wall in between. And now all of a sudden they're trying to figure out, hey, we're all working off the same inventory. How do we stretch it out? How do we get the best price? How do we get the best margin? So you're seeing the company come together internally. And even though I think cannabis does a really good job of folks working with each other's competitors,
Yeah.
um, I think you're seeing it more, right? Especially in different regions and states. But, there is less money per unit and there are less people to do the jobs. So
Yeah.
we should never forget that. And I think cannabis and the industry in general will be better having gone through this early in our life cycle.
Yeah, I mean, one of the observations that somebody shared that I read was I remember going to conferences in the fall of 2019 when we were going through a first sort of mini contraction where it was harder to get money and they were talking about operational excellence, MedMen and Acreage and others were having trouble. And then we had COVID come through and everybody was home, more cannabis was consumed. It was essential business and there's a lot of government money that went into households. So it gave everybody like another year and it was almost like a false hope, like,
Yep.
oh, we're doing fine until we got back to the situation where now we had a war that started a year ago and suddenly it's much tougher for people to do it. So we are in the sort of operational excellence environment and not everybody's going to make it through through the end of this economic bubble, which I'll get to in a minute. But I did want to touch on something that you mentioned, which is sort of the contraction in the technology space and the M&A. You guys have gone through a merger with another company. There's a lot of that happening right now. I mean, Akerna has left the industry. Dutchy had changes at the top of their organization. There are other companies that have been bought or pieces of companies that are getting bought. Do you see more of this happening? Because obviously, if you just went through a whole merger process, you probably got to see a lot of decks and books and whatnot. So I imagine there's a lot of companies that are quietly for sale.
Yeah, I mean, the day that we announced the closing, we had, I think, 15 or 20 calls from representatives of companies or founders themselves or chief executive officers wanting to ask if they could be part of it, if there was room. Some of the
Wow.
companies are complementary, right? Like it
Mhm.
makes sense now. Some of the data companies you could put in between Sweed and Leaf Trade, but some of them are, out of cash, right?
Yeah.
Or, may have some cash, but, their customers aren't using their service or consolidating or closing stores or closing markets. Um, we're always opportunistic, so we look at everything. Um, and we've got, one or two that, we'll probably flush out in the next 10 to 12 months.
Yep.
Um, but for us, it's just really straight line, focus on, the enterprise solution, focus on the multi-state operators, whether you have, 4 grows in 4 states or 20 grows in 10 states or 100 stores. The multiplicity, multiple markets, multiple stores add, no pun intended, multiple um, you know issues, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of always been the thesis of Leaf Trade and Sweed, right? Is just be that enterprise solution, because I don't believe an out of the box solution really works, right? It always needs to be tailored and focused on the customer, and that's what enterprise tech is, right? Is
Yeah.
you get 80% there, and then you've got to bend into kind of their internal stack.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've wisely focused where the money is, enterprise type customers that have that multi-jurisdictional complexity. Those people also have probably a good tendency to pay their bills and whatnot, as opposed to chasing around some of these, let's say smaller operators in these smaller states that, just really don't have the revenue to kind of support sophisticated solutions. So it's good. It's good to have focus.
Yeah, it's good. I will say though, I am also really impressed with, I call them, the medium-sized customers, but maybe they don't get all the headlines of, the Curaleaf for Veranos, GTIs,
Right.
some really impressive brands like, Gron or Item 9, where, they've got the same problems, and they're dealing with them head on. And some of those folks will come out, really, really strong. And so we've seen them on both sides. We've also seen the other side where, the tailwinds coming against them are, you know, are going to make it impossible, and their business unit economics won't make it easy for them to survive.
Yeah, yeah, it's very true. I think we've come much more to kind of an operational excellence survival mode for a lot of companies, and because if you're not, you're not going to be around for very long. Because we ourselves have seen it where some of the companies have been customers of ours have just left the industry. Like there are multiple industries and they're just pulling back.
Yep.
There was a payment firm that just stepped out. They're working with a different bank who doesn't want to be in cannabis, and they're a giant company. Cannabis wasn't a big piece of their business. Too volatile right now. They're just out. So yeah, I think as you said before, the people who are standing at the end of this time are going to be hopefully in good stead. So, two last questions. One, following up on that one, has the industry hit bottom yet, or do we still have? Are we in the valley? We just don't know. How long we have to go before we come up on the other side.
Um, I don't think the industry is hit. I don't think there's ever going to be a bottom, right?
Mhm.
I think because the industry is so fragmented that certain markets might have hit the bottom, right?
Ah, yeah,
And I think that's how we should look at it is Illinois is great. I love Illinois. It's been awesome to watch it grow, and it's been awesome for some of the West Coast brands to actually come into Illinois.
mhm,
But prices will come down. They'll come down slower, and everyone will be kind of working together. But in 10 years, Illinois prices will look probably not as low as California, but more there. So I think it's more stages of markets. I think some of the markets will have to kind of blow up before they're reset, right?
yeah,
Or some of the legacy providers won't be able to make it, or you'll see some of them get acquired. But I think, we as an industry are really, you know, being smart about it. People are talking about it. People are making changes. if this was another industry and we see it all the time, I don't think we could make changes this fast, or I don't think they can make changes this fast. And if you think about, some legislation will help this industry out, right? Maybe it's in 6 months, maybe it's in 2 or 3 years. But if we can get past this, right, and the consolidation and people leave the industry, like you mentioned, it's only going to, feed the folks who are still here.
Yeah, no, that's very true. It'll be interesting to see, what this is like, because it's happened in lots of other industries before, and we're just going through what some of us have experienced ourselves in other industries.
Yep.
I was around when the .com bust happened, and it was messy, and if you could hang in there, that was good, and then you came out the other side, and you were typically much better off because it forced you to focus as a business, and if you didn't focus, you weren't going to be one of the ones standing at the end, and obviously you have done that, and so far cannabis media has as well. So hopefully we'll be there as we plow through this. So any other trends, Michael, you're looking at, or things that we should be keeping our ear out for in the industry, or even with Leaf Trade and Sweed?
Yeah, I mean, I think the message to take away from this podcast is, while there's this gray cloud, we all see it, we all read it. Even folks who aren't in the cannabis industry, when they start asking you about it, then there's some gray clouds. But under those gray clouds, I think there's more positive change as far as process and people than people realize. So I think not even the turnaround, but the upswing, like you mentioned, that kind of maybe falsely happened or happened too fast in 2020 because of COVID. I think it's going to start happening the right way, and I think we'll be better for it. I also, have been really encouraged with a lot of the West Coast brands, where we kind of thought we were setting up for, a lot of the large multi-state operators kind of shutting those brands out, going full vertical, and just sticking with their products. And while some of them have gone more vertical, and of course, we're seeing the inclusion of some of these, legacy, really dominant brands on the West Coast start coming, into the Midwest and the East Coast the right way, with the partnership of some of the MSOs, which at the end of the day, if the stores are great and the products are great, the consumer will have a good experience. They'll spend more, they'll come more, we'll all win. And I think that's got to be the focus.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Michael, as always, a very thoughtful time spent with you. I learned a lot, as I'm sure our listeners did. So once again, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I'll see you in 10 months. Do it again.
Exactly. Well, Ben Zing is out in Chicago, so I'm going to be there. So I'm hopeful that you'll be there as well.
Yep, I'll be there.
Excellent. So thanks for joining us on today's podcast. I'm your host, Ed Keating. Stay tuned for more updates from the Data Vault.